If you're getting divorced in Massachusetts and own a house, you have to decide what to do with it. Your spouse may be trying to take that house away from you. If you're going to sell it, you need to make sure you get your fair share. In this video, we'll discuss all the issues you need to think about and how to protect your rights. Your family home is full of memories. That's where you celebrated holidays, had birthday parties, and maybe where you brought your babies home from the hospital and raised them. Now that your marriage is ending, you have to decide what to do with it. Besides the emotional attachment, it's probably the largest asset you have. You may be in for a fight if your spouse wants to take that away from you. You need to know your rights in order to protect yourself. We can help you through this process without costing you a fortune. By working together, you can decide what's the best thing to do for you and your family. You're taking an important step toward the next exciting chapter of your life. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. That means that when dividing assets, a court will divide them fairly. That doesn't mean evenly, 50-50. There are many factors a court will use when deciding how to divide things, such as the marital home. There are two types of property in Massachusetts. There's separate property and there's marital property. Marital property is anything bought during the course of the marriage. Separate property is property that was bought prior to the marriage, or it was received during the course of the marriage but was intended for only one person. For instance, if you received an inheritance from a family member or a gift that was intended for you alone. Now, both marital and separate property can be divided in Massachusetts, so sometimes it doesn't really matter if it's considered marital or separate property. When deciding if the house is marital property, one of the first things that you want to ask yourself is, when did you buy the house? Did you buy it before the marriage or after the marriage? If you bought the house before the marriage, it would tend to be considered separate property rather than marital property. But it isn't always easy to determine if a house is marital property or not. Even if you bought the house prior to the marriage, a court could still decide that it is divisible. In that case, the court will look to see several things. First, if the home increased in value during the course of the marriage. If your spouse helped to improve or maintain the home. For instance, did they put in a new roof or a new heating system? Or if your spouse has helped to make the mortgage payments during the marriage. If you use money prior to the marriage to make a down payment, you may be able to receive a credit for that money. That's even if the marital home is considered marital property. Who gets to stay in the house during the divorce? During your divorce, both you and your spouse may stay in the home. In fact, that's what a lot of people do. That is, however, unless there are a couple things going on. The first is if there's a restraining order preventing that person from staying in the home or even coming within a certain distance of the house. The second is if there's a temporary order that's been put in place. Now, a temporary order is, as it sounds, an order from the court that is temporary in nature. It'll be in place during the course of the divorce itself. A temporary order can order one spouse out of the house, giving exclusive rights to the other spouse to live in the home. Further, the temporary order can specify who pays the bills, who pays the mortgage, who's in charge of paying the taxes, and it can also address child custody issues. Now, if somebody has child custody, that person is more likely to be awarded, at least temporarily, the exclusive use and rights of the marital home. A temporary order is not permanent, but it is advantageous for you to get that order because if you do, when it comes time to make the permanent order, you've already been in the house for a period of time and perhaps you have the children there as well, a court will be less likely to order you out of the house if you can afford the mortgage payments. Before we look at exactly how a court decides how to divide your marital home, I just want to let you know that if you are considering a divorce in Massachusetts, please feel free to visit affordlaw.org divorce.com/checklist. We have come up with a checklist of the 7 most important things you should be considering before filing for divorce. When awarding the house on a permanent basis, the court will take many factors into consideration, such as the length of the marriage, the conduct of the parties during the course of the marriage, did anybody engage in bad behavior, and what was the contribution to increasing the marital asset by each of the spouses. What are the age and the health of the parties? If one person is in bad health, they may have trouble purchasing a new home. What are the occupations and incomes of the parties? What are the opportunities each party has to earn income? What are the present and future needs of the children? The court wants to keep the children in the house if at all possible. And each person's contribution to the marriage. Basically, there are 4 outcomes when dividing a marital home. The first is one spouse buys out the other. The next is that the house is awarded to one spouse. You and your spouse can continue to own the house jointly, or you can sell the house and divide the proceeds. For financial reasons, selling the house is the most common outcome. The court can also order a deferred sale of the home. A deferred sale is where the court orders the sale of the home to take place at some point in the future. It's when there are children that are being raised in the house, and the court doesn't want to upset them by making them move. So at some point in the future, perhaps when the youngest child becomes 18 years of age, or when everybody has graduated from high school, the home will be sold and the parties will each get a portion of the equity. The judge must find that it is in the best interest of the children to order a deferred sale. If one person is going to buy out the other person's interest in the home, that person must be able to get a mortgage in their name alone. So let's say that you're going to buy out the interests of your spouse. You have to be able to get a mortgage and refinance in your own name. Then your spouse's name will be taken off the deed and you will be the sole owner of that marital property. If one spouse gets the house, the other spouse may be entitled to what's called an offset. So that means that one spouse who gets the house is getting a great deal of value. That value must be offset by some other asset, say, for instance, a retirement account. So retirement accounts are generally distributable between the parties. Perhaps that person keeps the retirement account and offsets the value of the home that you've received. If you sell the house, you'll have to go through a process. You need to find out what is the value of the home, what is the fair market value. So you'll have to hire an appraisal, a real estate appraiser, to go out and get the fair market value of the home. Next, you must figure out how much, if any, is still owed on the mortgage. You subtract the outstanding mortgage debt from the fair market value of the home, and that gives you the equity. That equity will then be divided. Again, not necessarily 50-50, but equitably. When deciding how to award the home, the court will look to several factors, such as who contributed to the purchase and maintenance of the home. How are other marital assets being divided? Were there any liens on the house caused by just one party? If there's no equity in the home, that is, the value of the home is less than the amount that you owe on the mortgage, you are considered what they say upside down or underwater on the mortgage. That means that if you sell the house, you won't be making any profit. In fact, you'll still owe money on the mortgage. In that case, there are no assets to divide, but the debt that you owe on the mortgage will also be divided between you and your spouse in an equitable manner. Dealing with a house in a divorce is complicated. There are many factors that need to be addressed. It is your most valuable asset and has extremely emotional ties. You need to protect your rights now because you can't go back later and change them. For more information on Massachusetts divorces, please feel free to see our next video.